Hello, good morning, and welcome to the Dailies on Echo Television. Today, the 20th of January 2025. Quite a number of events happened during the weekend, especially quite unfortunately, where we saw that a tanker explosion that happened at Niger, where we saw scores of people killed as well as others being injured, and then about 8 have received mass burial as we are speaking. So, quite very unfortunate, and we hope that this will serve as a lesson to people to stay away from that. And I clearly remember, Rachel, I mean, we've been talking about the issue of exposure, even though I know this would be what would be on most of our papers. But we have had several discussions. This is one out of the many that have happened. I clearly remember we had one around, I think last year we saw that of Jikawa State,
Yes.
as well as we also saw one around that Niger axis as well, where we said even though it was at night time, and then we saw the number of people that died as a result of that. And then I just couldn't way to actually discuss it properly on the paper, because I think this is a story that has been on the lips of many others. And then, of course, we are seeing that this is kind of painting a picture to the international scene out there. I mean, it's as a result of hardship. Nigerians couldn't wait, and that's why people went there with generator trying to scoop it, and then to put it in another tanker and all of that. So many other stories regarding that, and then you just cannot help but wonder, what are we going to do? What can the government do to actually send message to Nigerians? Stay clear. Anytime you see a tanker falling, go away, especially when we're talking about something such as petrol that is highly flammable and all of that. So it's quite unfortunate that this is what we're faced with. And then, believe you me, Rachel, even after discussing it today, when we have another tanker falling today, people still go there to
Of
actually
course.
scoop petrol. So I just don't know what else can actually sink deep into Nigerians for them to actually stay away. Is it because of the hardship? Can we really say that is the reason why we have people, cannot actually help but actually go close to tankers such as that?
Sally, I've said this before and I'll repeat it again. Even when petrol was at 16 naira per litre in Nigeria, anytime we have a tanker falling in this country, we have people rushing to go and fetch it. I know we've been a poor developing country for a long period of time, and we've always had this mentality when fuel was low, life wasn't that as difficult as it is now in this country, and we still have people rushing to go and fetch and got burnt at the end of the day. Is not the beginning. I don't think it will be the last in this country, and there's nothing the government can do about it. This is out of hand for the government. Sele, there are those that didn't go close and
But
they
still
didn't
go.
get no, they didn't get. There are those who kept their distance and didn't get burned. There are those who didn't go for the awu, for the of the parking and all of that, and their lives were saved, and they survived it, and they were those that, except if it's unfortunate that you happen to be passing by where something dangerous happened and you become a victim, you got caught up and all of that. Apart from that, we have people that majority of them are going there, and when this any spark they end up being dead and victims of this situation. Can the government really come in and tell Nigerians, stop? We know the risks. We know the risks of fire. We know the risks of a tanker falling. An explosion can happen at anything. Any little thing can start a fire in this kind of scenario, but we still find Nigerians going. This is more of a personal decision, right? I know what the government can do is that we are supposed to have security personnel around and always available. We talk about them not being static, but moving and patrolling and all of that. Usually, in a case like this, that area is supposed to be secured, for example, and make sure civilians don't go close to it until until the people that are responsible to come and clear out that place, the petrol and all of that. The environment is supposed to be secured and all of that. I think that is where the government is lacking, and is mostly, this has nothing to do with federal government. It's the government of the state, the people responsible. There's supposed to be fire service there immediately. There's supposed to be people working with the petroleum, who are the company that have that tanker, are supposed to come immediately. There's supposed to be an emergency response to secure the environment, to make sure that it is safe, that there will be no explosion. Aside from that, Every other thing is up to individuals to run away from it or to run
To
towards
it,
it.
of
And
course.
majority of that responsibility, since we know that we are in a government that is lagging behind in emergency response, then what are you supposed to do as an individual seller? If you're lucky seller that a tanker falls and doesn't explode immediately and you are there, I think
You
as
have
a
ample
sensible
time to
Nigerian,
run away
you
from.
run away from it. So why are you going to fetch the petroleum when you know that you are most likely going to die, and that petrol that you want to fetch, you're not even going to end up selling it and make any money at the end of the day? Apart from what I've stated that the government can do, I think every other thing boils
Falls on
down to
individuals.
individuals and what we plan on doing. We cannot blame it on hardship. It has been our attitude for years, even before now that the fuel pump price is what it is. It has been our attitude as Nigerians, and we are not the only one in the world buying petrol this expensive. You should always have it at the back of your mind. It's more of our mindset and all of that. There's no excuse that it's that expensive, but at the same time, we are not the only ones buying petrol that expensive. And the question is, people in other places, when they have oil spillage, petrol spillage on the ground, do they run towards it or fire from it to save their life? This is when you will know that it's totally a mindset thing rather
Yeah.
than truly a hardship problem.
Honestly, because just like you said, it's a mindset thing. So for a number of people, it's better I die trying than to die, with hunger. I think that
Yeah.
is what. And then people are always of the opinion, such as, okay, what if there was no any explosion? Shall I be able to actually get,
Yes.
all that kind of attitude we have? But just like we said, it's a mindset thing, and maybe to some, just like you said, the state, and then maybe the companies as well. Maybe we should regulate the time. I
We
think I keep
should.
saying about that, where you need to have these tankers using the road. Maybe,
Yes.
just maybe, this can actually be another way. Imagine if the tanker maybe was actually maybe around 10 or maybe
At
2
night.
a.m. Wherever you're taking it to, you take it safely, because in fact the weather is cool at that time. So you go there safely, and then even if there is an explosion, I believe maybe the casualties will
It
not
will
be
be.
this much. But then it's really quite unfortunate. Well, we're seeing that today as well is the D-Day for Trump. Today will be the inauguration. So quite a number of activities are ongoing in
It's
the
a global
US.
event. If it's happening in one place, it is
Of
a
course,
global event.
it
Yes.
is a global event. So we just see all of that. Well, we'll just continue looking at the events on the paper, and we would love to start with the Metric newspaper.
The first story on the Matrix, Shatima to attend World Economic Forum in Davos. The writer says African Development Bank backed humanitarian, resilience investing, roadmap for Africa top agenda. The English Premier League, Man City rout Ipswich as Man United falter at Old Trafford again. It's D-Day as Trump takes office as America's 47th president to issue 100 plus executive orders on first day in office. TikTok back online after Trump pledged to restore it. SEC sets deadline for 2025 CMO's registration and renewal. You can find details on page 2. The big story on the paper, tanker explosions. Tinubu to set up committee to tackle menace. Advises Nigerians to stop approaching petrol spill sites. Mandates NOA to initiate nationwide educational campaign. Directs transfer of survivors to tertiary medical facilities for treatment. EFCC begins auction of over 900 forfeited cars. Soludo launches Anambra security system, Operation Udo Gaachi. You can find details on page 3. The Zeni Alison Madukwe denies ownership of repatriated $52.8 million. We have an entertainment story. Asake celebrates 30th birthday with Tesla gift, and a picture story with the caption promoting fashion, music, and art, where we can see from left to right more Budu, the CEO of Ebony Life Media, Lagos State Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu, British Deputy High Commissioner Mr. Johnny Baxter, and leading Nigerian filmmaker Funke Akindele at the Lagos Canvas, a celebration of music, film, fashion, and art in Lagos State. This happened yesterday, and that's all the news on the Matrix newspaper.
On First News newspaper, there's any denies linked to repatriated $52.8 million name owner. And then we see, don't Japa help build Nigeria, Jonathan urges the youth. Well, that's more on the youth whether or not they want to leave or stay back. Tinubu directs NOA to launch fuel safety campaign after Niger explosion. EFCC condemns social media support for alleged killer of officer as callous and inhuman. And then we have Dangote refinery site crude oil costs for petrol price hike. The big story here, terror in Ogun. Gunmen invade Celestial Church, brutally slay prophet mid-service. You wonder why that happened. It's really a sad one. We hope the government are actually trying to probe what really resulted to this, and then the perpetrators need to be brought to book. Cleric exposes financial rift among gospel star Mercy Chinwo. Ezeti Judy K. You can find more detail of this in the paper. Aggressive policy push FCT revenue to record 25 billion naira monthly coming from Wike. Calm return to Gaza as Israel-Hamas ceasefire takes effect. More detail found in the paper. The picture story here, we can see the minister Mohammed Idris lead a federal government delegation. Minister Mohammed Idris leads the federal government delegation to condole victim of the Suleja tanker explosion on Sunday on behalf of the president. We can see one of the victims over there, and then together with the minister and the delegation. And that's all on First News newspaper.
On the Daily Times, Wike to commence commissioning of 6 road projects today. 2025 World Economic Forum is the big story. Shetima departs Abuja for Davos. You can find details on page 2, and also a picture story where we can see the Vice President Kashim Shetima surrounded by aides as he departed Abuja on Sunday for Davos, Switzerland to attend the 2025 World Economic Forum. Media education, ace radio presenter Riume Efeti joins WAPMA. You can find details on page 2. Governor Soludo accuses ECPA of rising kidnapping. Reps blame corruption on weak accounting system. On tanker explosion, Ganduje commiserates Niger State. The last story here, tax reform, Northern Group kick against VAT hike. And that's all the news on the Daily Times newspaper.
On the Voice of Liberty, tax reform to take effect in July, coming from Oyedele. More detail found in the paper. Dangote in court seek import licenses, revocation of NNPCL and others. Bandit leader Tunji on the run as military raids the camp, kills son. $2.3 billion Mambila arbitration. Ex-President Buhari set to testify today in Paris as the ex-AGF withdraws support for Sunrise. Former President Muhammadu Buhari is set to testify today, Monday, in the $2.3 billion arbitration case between Nigeria and Sunrise Power over the Mambila hydropower project. More detail found in the paper. We buy child at 500,000, set at 1 million naira, talking about child trafficking suspect, and this happened in Ondo State. Coming from Akwa Ibom community, accuses BUA of land grabbing, vows to halt the refinery. Coming from the Ohanizi, we are not Igbo, says River Group, strip the new president of all titles. More detail concerning that story can be found in the paper. The Nigeria Immigration Service allowed the public to emergence of the Achat sec in Kaduna. You can read more detail of what that means, and that's all on the Voice of Liberty.
On the Punch newspaper, LP crisis, OBOT's caretaker panel drags Abure before Supreme Court. Mass deportation fear, border closure as Trump returns to White House. On Edo Tribunal, police tighten security as violence rises. On Niger explosion, Tinubu, Buhari, others mourn as death toll hits 86. You can find details on page 23. The big story on the Punch newspaper, NLC faults fresh petrol price hike, says federal government insensitive. Labor fears hike will fuel food crisis. increase in line with rising crude price, a statement from Dangote. You can find details of the big story on page 31. In Gaza, UN orders chair as freed Israeli reunite with families. UN orders chair as freed Israelis reunite with families. 89,000 Nigerians denied Schengen visa in 2 years. A report, you can find details on page 16. Catholic Church suspends Delta priest over secret U.S. wedding. Eric Air shareholders tackle AMCON over 455 billion naira debt claim. Details can be found on page 36, and that's all the news on the Punch newspaper.
On Vanguard newspaper, Labour Party crisis, we are heading to the Supreme Court, coming from Nina D. Usman. Rising national price of crude force hike in the petrol price. OPEC predict rise in oil demand. Prices, refineries and their marketers to shift the burden to consumers. As Dangote refinery attributes the new ex-depot price to surge in crude price. Detail found on page 5. Still on the paper, high interest rate, which is a big story. Manufacturers cut back on bank loans. Credit to sector records first quarterly decline in 2 years. The writer following that story, manufacturers seek other funding options coming from the CPPE. High lending rates, output decline discourage lending for investment coming from the Manufacturer Association of Nigeria. Businesses postpone investment decision coming from analysts. More detail of this story can be found on page 19. Efforts ongoing to rescue abducted AIG wife coming from the police. Federal government probes Niger tanker explosion as death toll hits 86. And then what we have on the MAGA, what await Nigeria as Trump mounts saddle. You can see the picture story here showing Donald Trump arrives Washington, D.C. More detail found on page 8 and 9. Syrup writes Trump seek return of stolen asset as Dezeni denies ownership of repatriated $52.8 million loot. Onasaya refutes fraud allegation, vows to defend reputation. We will recall the ex talking about the former MD of the First Bank Holdings. You can do about read more detail of that on page 4. And then as well, we have CAF CC Eyima crash in Egypt. For sport lovers, you can look up that story on page 37, and that's all on Vanguard newspaper.
On the Guardian newspaper, the big story, posers over checks balances as federal government enforces council autonomy in funding. Yoruba Ronu Udume CDWR resists tax reform bills. Gunmen assassinated cleric during church service in Ogun. Dangote explains PMS ex-depot price adjustment. 18 electricity towers damaged in 5 days despite surveillance. Details can be found on page 8. Soludo unveils Anambra Homeland Security Law new outfit. Telecom subscribers kick as Minister Defense tariff hike. Africa's economy at crossroads as Trump's second coming stokes uncertainty. You can find details on page 6. The last story on the paper, procurement contract frauds accounts for 90% of Nigeria's corruption cases. And that's all the news on the Guardian newspaper.
On Daily Independent newspaper, Syrup writes Trump seek return of Nigerian stolen asset, ban on corrupt officials. Don't sacrifice education sector for IMF, ASU tells Tinubu. The big story on rising insecurity, reps more target for IGP, service chiefs to check poor performance. One appraiser to form basic of reappointment and disengagement. More detail found in the paper. Eric Air shareholders debug AMCON resolent claim before takeover. Ex-Petroleum Minister Dazeni denies ownership of the repatriated $52.8 million. As well, we have Dangote clarifies increase in petrol price. You can find out on page 7. Sheitima to represent Tinubu at the World Economic Forum meeting in Davos. Vandals destroy 18 transmission towers in 5 days. This is coming from the Transmission Company of Nigeria. They are lamenting about that. Despite security, we are still seeing all of this. Gaza ceasefire begins with release of 3 Israeli hostages, 19 Palestinian prisoners. More detail found on page 6. Downside of the paper, Oya Sanya refutes allegation, vows to defend reputation. More detail found on page 6, and that's all on Daily Independent newspaper.
On Nigerian Tribune, death toll in Niger tanker fire rises to 86. 80 victims given mass burial, 55 injured. Tinubu governors orders mourn. Nigerians kick against fresh move to float another national carrier. Trump takes office today as 47th U.S. president. Global oil prices behind hike on petrol price, statement from Dangote Refinery. The Zenith distances self from ownership of repatriated $52.8 million loot. CBN, NCC, DMBS reach agreement on 200 billion naira telco fees debt. The big story on the paper, tax reform bills knocks kudos trail governor's proposal. The writer says expert says NGF's decision doesn't fully address long-term fiscal sustainability, fairness issues. Only remove political obstacles to the reform. Derivation should be up to 50-60%, they say. Decision splits leaders and groups. CUPP, Afenifere, and Dume Okori, Northern Coalition speak. You can find all the details on page 6, 22, and 23. Gunmen kill Celestial Church prophet during service in Ogun. Police in Ondo bust children trafficking syndicate, rescue 14 children in Anambra. Ex-First Bank GMD Onasanya refutes allegations, vows to defend reputation. You can find details on page 24. Still on Nigerian Tribune 2025 budget. National Assembly queries ghost projects in Steel Ministry. Calls for independent forensic audit of expenditure. Federal government still looking for $2 billion to revamp Ajakuta steel firm, a statement from the minister. You can find details on page 3. We have a picture here where we can see Ekiti State Governor Mr. Biodun Ayebanji with the injured firefighter, Higher Superintendent Osho, during a visit to his residence in Ado Ekiti on Sunday to appreciate him for his heroic act during the recent fire incident at a filling station in the state. And that's all the news on Nigerian Tribune.
Before further analysis of other papers, we'd love to take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue with the paper review. Please stay tuned with us. Thanks for staying tuned in. Still the Dailies. We have been looking at a number of events on the paper, ranging from the increase of petrol price, where we're seeing that Dangote is saying that it's as a result of increase of the crude oil in the global market, as well as we're seeing the tanker explosion, where about 86 people have been found dead as a result of it, and then others are currently receiving treatment in the hospital. As well as we're looking at in the international scene, we see that the vice president is out of the country to represent the president at the World Economic Summit in Switzerland, as well as we're looking at today being the inauguration of Trump. It might be in the US, but it's a global event. So all fingers are crossed. Let's see some of the executive order he will be passing, which might actually affect Africa and Nigeria as well. So these are many other stories that what we have been looking at on the papers. Please do well to drop your comments, your views, as they are always welcome on the show. I still have with me Rachel. Thank you so
You're
much.
welcome, Sally.
All right, let's take a look at the next paper, which is Blueprint newspaper. 800 billion naira allocation not enough to address road infrastructure coming from Umahi. It seems every ministry is having a problem with the allocation they are receiving for the year. On business, we have global crude price driving petrol pump price increase coming from Dangote. A Yimba crash out of Confederation Cup. This is on sport. You can find on page 32. And then the big story here, 265 lives lost to tanker explosions in 4 months, coming from the federal government. Set up a committee to steam tie evacuate victims to tertiary medical centers. NEMA deploys rescue team. Tinubu Buhari mourn the people that died, where we saw about 8 have received mass burial. More detail found on page 10. ASU to the federal government, don't sacrifice Nigeria education system for the IMF policies. You can read more detail of why the ASU are saying that. Nigeria transforming to producer, net exporter of refined petrol products coming from NNPCL. Why we issued license to National Oil Major and others coming from the NMDPRA. More detail found on page 6. Police arrest child theft trafficking. Serve as nation conscience coming from Shetima. High inflation, interest rate hike will compound debts of the country. Do well to get the paper in more detail, and that's all on Blueprint newspaper.
On New Nigeria, the first story, Caleb Danladi Foundation releases JAMB forms funds for Kaduna underprivileged children in rural communities. You can find this story on page 5. Nigerian youth regrouping to actualize democratic revolution and good governance. NYA is saying ahead of the 2027 elections, says directionless APC government must be sacked. Don't sacrifice Nigeria's education system for IMF policies. ASU wants Tinubu kick against replacing TET fund with NEL fund. Tax National Assembly federal government to strengthen TET fund. You can start with this story on the front page. Northern governors commiserate victims. Niger state government over Diko Junction tragic tanker explosion. NDLEA thwarts Indian-born nursing students attempt to ingest 76 wraps of cocaine. 2020, 204 Ebonyi foreign scholarship students for MSc and PhD in UK airlifted. You can find details on page 14. You can govern better by inclusivity, clear vision of mission, Governor Bala tells Tinubu. On tax bill, CNG rejects 13% payment for consultancy engagement. Increase in petrol pump price, not from us, a statement from Dangote. Peter Obi's broader vision for Nigeria built on justice, equity, good governance, a statement from a Gembi. You can find details on page 4, and that's all the news on New Nigerian.
On Nigerian News, Direct alleged 12.3 billion naira fraud. I have not been invited by EFCC, coming from the ex-First Bank MD. Niger tanker explosion, death toll hits 86 as Tinubu governors and others mourn victims. NFIU partners NITDA to remove Nigeria from FATF grey list of by May. Vandals destroy over 18 transmission towers in 5 days, coming from TCN. More data found on page 22. Regarding PMS price hike, we have absorbed 50% of cost increase to make Nigerians comfortable, coming from Dangote. The big story, they are not mere Yahoo boys. EFCC raise alarm over arms proliferation. As mixed reaction trace officers dead in Anambra. You can read more detail of that story on page 4. We have a picture story as well. You can do well to get the paper and read more detail, and that's all on Nigerian News Direct.
On the Nation newspaper, the big story on Algon, 774 cancels to open dedicated account with CBN. The writer says NFIU to monitor spending, fraudulent chairman, other officials for prosecution by EFCC and ICPC. At the top of the paper, Labour Party leadership crisis shifts to Supreme Court. While upload of 2023 presidential poll result failed, this is coming from INEC, glitch due to system error. Trump takes over today. National Assembly decries Steel Development Ministry's phony project. And Fulbright saying why Rivers crisis persists. You can find details of these stories on page 5, 4, and 32. Poly workers to begin strike on Wednesday. NDLA arrests India-bound student over cocaine. How to avert tanker explosion by Tinubu, Sultan, Buhari, and others. If you want to know how by President Bola Tinubu, Sultan, and Buhari, you can start with the details on the front page and continue on page 5. 18 transmission towers vandalized in 6 days, says TCN. And that's all the news on the Nation newspaper.
Looking at the next paper, which is This Nigeria. National Assembly alleges ghost project in Steel Development Ministry. Calls for forensic audit by independent auditors. Data found on page 4. Niger tanker explosion, 80 buried in mass grave, 55 in critical condition as death toll hits 86. Tinubu can senators mourn describe tragedy as unfortunate. Data found on page 2 and 10. We see the picture story showing the tanker. Over 300 billion naira owned in right of occupancy in the FCT. Over 300 billion naira owned in right of occupancy in the FCT. Wike vows to charge electricity vandals with economic sabotage. You can read that on page 5. Criminals, kidnappers, herdsmen disguised as IPOP, ESN. This is coming from Next report. It says most kidnapping incident carried out by bandits. You can find that story on page 2. And that's all on This Nigeria.
On New Telegraph, electronic money transfer levy up 17.3% to 212.69 billion naira, a report for the year 2024. Bid round, Nigerian oil firm wins major block in Angola. Jonathan to Nigerians, Japa countries were also built, developed by people. FCT now generates 2.5 billion naira monthly as against 9 billion naira. This is a report from Wiki. New down as Trump returns to White House. On LP crisis, caretaker committee heads to Supreme Court. The big story on New Telegraph, over 18 transmission towers vandalized in January. This is coming from TCN, says vandals targeted towers 146, 147, 149 along Owerri, Ohoada, 132 kV line on January 14. Base brackets removed, tower stability compromised. You can find details on page 2. 90% of LG polls conducted in 17 states not credible, coming from Yaga Africa. Concerns over recurring cases of accidental killings in military operations. You can find details of this story on page 14 and 16. ASU to federal government, don't sacrifice Nigeria's education system to please IMF. Gaza ceasefire, Israel receives 3 hostages. You can find this international story on page 5. Still on New Telegraph, Niger tanker explosion, death toll hit 86, 80 buried in mass grave. Nupeng blames incident on bad roads. Tinubu orders comprehensive Medicare for the injured. Southern Governors Forum condole with Niger governor. On corruption allegation, no evidence in UK Disney stole Nigeria's funds. Ezekome is saying. You can find details on page 4. We have a study, processed red meat linked to dementia risks. You can find details on page 26. So it's better you stick to fresh red meat than the processed one. And that's all the news on New Telegraph.
All right, on Business Day newspaper, oil output stutters as rig count doubles. MRS Adruva Hayden to sell Dangote petrol at 970 naira to a liter. And also we're seeing food production seeing rising on improved security. And then we have confidence built that Naira has finally found its footing. Confidence built that Naira has finally found its footing. This is coming from Bloomberg. You can read more detail of that on page 27, and that's all on Business Day newspaper.
The big story on Punch Sport Extra, goals galore. Desert scores hat-trick in Rangers win. Onochu Simon net for first time in 2025. Udinese coach speaks on Okoye's alleged scandal. Enyimba cash out of Confederation Cup after Zamalek loss. Chukwueze nears a reasonary return. Devils suffer third straight home loss to Seagulls. And we have Blues keen to end winless run, that is Chelsea. Mbappe backs brace in Los Blancos victory. Walker close to Milan switch. You can find details on page 3. Chelsea receive offer for Joan Felix. We have Djokovic Alcaraz clash in Australian Open quarterfinals. White ready to fight Joshua, and that's all the news on Punch Sport Extra.
And that's how far we can get on the program this morning. Thank you for keeping a date with us. Thank you, Rachel, for doing this.
You're welcome, Celia.
All right, so we come your way again tomorrow. Please do have a great day ahead.